My older sister. Made by Kiba Inuzuka. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. My life has been average at most. I lived in a family of 2 girls and 1 boy. There was my older sister, Jenny, me, and my younger brother, Alex. We had a typical childhood, I guess. Jenny was popular, with her blonde hair, blue eyes, and skinny frame. Alex, early on, showed a penchant for sports and became the star athlete of the family. But myself, just like the rest of my life, was very average. I wasn't overly smart. I wasn't ugly, but I didn't stand out. I had a small group of friends. I was average. But I idolized my older sister. Jenny was everything I would never be. She had friends, upon friends, upon friends. She had a string of boyfriends starting from the time she was 11. There was always some boy, some drama. She grew tired of it, but I loved it. Jenny loved me, too. We were really close as children. Mom and Dad loved me, sure, but they didn't notice me like they did Jenny and Alex. Because there was nothing special about me, not really. But Jenny didn't see it that way. See, she paid attention to me. She gave me makeovers and taught me about makeup. She used to take me shopping even with her popular friends and show me the best clothes to wear for my body shape. She would tell me all about her amazing, glittering life, and she would listen if and when I found some small contribution to make to our conversations. She was my role model. But sometimes life isn't average. Sometimes it isn't typical. When Jenny was 16 and I was 13, she was found in her room, a bottle of pills spilled out next to her. I don't think they even bothered with much of an investigation. It was clear what she'd done, although no one really knew why. Life can be funny that way. Sometimes it's the ones who seem happy who are struggling the most. It was a very difficult time for my family. But life went on. As I grew older, I grew to love my average life. My parents paid a little more attention to me, with Jenny gone. I went to a state university for journalism, where I met my husband, Alan. We got married right out of college. I worked for the local paper and he had an office job at a company just a few blocks down the road. Our life was blissful, beautiful, and unremarkable. Until, that is, I became pregnant. It started when I was about 2 weeks late. I've always been as regular as a clock, but at this time work was pretty hectic and I wasn't really paying attention. Then, one night, I had a terribly real, terribly strange dream. In the dream, I was in my old childhood room, sitting on the flower-patterned comforter on my twin-sized bed, playing with a pacifier for God knows what reason. In walked Jenny. She came and climbed on the bed. She was toying with an empty pill bottle. She looked into my eyes. I don't know why, but I woke up screaming. To be honest, I hadn't paid much thought to Jenny in years, and I'd never had a dream like that. My husband woke up to comfort me, but I was already on my way to the bathroom. I vomited into the toilet for about 20 minutes, thinking of missed periods, pill bottles, and Jenny. I took a pregnancy test that day. It came out positive. My husband and I were overjoyed. We celebrated with a nice dinner. We called our parents, who were both incredibly excited. We talked about baby names, nursery, and all the things you associate with babies. We got to bed late, exhausted but happy, cuddling together like newlyweds, dreaming of little cherubs dancing in our arms. I woke up to see my sister standing next to the bed. If the night before had been frightening, you can't imagine how this felt. Here she was, Jenny, the real, not so alive Jenny. She stared down at me. I reached out, I almost felt as though I could touch her. But she turned and walked out of the room. From that day on, Jenny was always there. She was standing next to the bed when I woke up in the morning. She followed me to work. She watched as I picked out baby clothes, occasionally fingering 1 or 2 items that she particularly liked. She was always there. Sure, I thought about telling my husband. But what would I say? that his average wife was about to disturb his average life with her newfound ability to see the dead? Unlikely. Rather, I considered it a strange and extraordinary experience in my otherwise unremarkable life. Besides, I enjoyed it, in a way. Here was my long-lost sister. My ages ago best friend, the one person who I looked up to. The person I wanted to be when I grew up. She was back again. It was comforting to have her there as my stomach grew fat and round, and I began to waddle back and forth, trying to control my deranged hormones. Sometimes, she would put her hand on my stomach to feel the baby. When she did, the baby would start to kick. How comforting to know that my baby would share a special connection with Jenny. Jenny was there when my husband drove me to the hospital, crying in the back through the pain of my contractions. She followed us to the maternity ward and stood calmly next to me as I pushed, and pushed. She kept her hand placed on my stomach, and it was a comfort. Then it was over. They placed the baby into my arms. A girl. A wonderful, plump little baby girl, whose cries were the most beautiful thing in the world. Alan and I played with her tiny, curling fingers. When I looked to the bedside, Jenny was gone. Now, don't misunderstand. I have always missed my sister. She was very important to me and I miss her still. But I was somewhat relieved to see her gone. I missed her, but she could never be a part of my life again. Now I could return to my happy, typical life. My happy life with my happy baby and happy husband. I was happy for a few weeks before I noticed it. I was playing with little baby Ellen and she looked up at me and I noticed them. Her startling blue eyes. The eyes that neither her father nor I possessed. She looked at me with an eerie calmness. When I looked into her eyes, I saw Jenny. And so, tomorrow morning, I will fall to the floor in an outburst of tears and screams. Alan will frantically dial emergency services as I will clutch at the body of my child. When the EMTs arrive, they will pry the cold, lifeless body from my embrace and I will collapse into Alan's arms. I will be sad. I will miss her, just as I missed Jenny. But Jenny can never be a part of my life again, no matter how much she wants to be. After all, it took me years to be rid of her the first time. Come Closer. Made by Creepypasta Indexer. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. I'd actually seen him on our way home from school. He looked dirty and disturbed, and stared straight at us as our bus went by. We even made jokes about him, probably as our way of pretending we weren't afraid. He was incredibly out of place in our middle-class suburb, so his mere presence felt threatening. Thus our panic when the three of us got off at our stop and saw him at the corner, about to look in our direction. He was between us and our houses, and the bus had already pulled away, so we bolted for the bushes of a nearby yard. We weren't sure if he had seen us, but we peered through the leaves and saw him stalking our way, muttering randomly. Tim, my neighbor, insisted that he'd seen a large knife in the man's ragged clothing. Danny, a kid I hardly knew who had just moved into the neighborhood, insisted that he was imagining it, that Tim's glasses must have reflected the sun wrong or something. Still, we were terrified, and the sidewalk was going to bring him right by us. It was Tim that broke and ran first, keeping low. I followed, my heart pounding, as we dove into the darkness underneath the porch of the unfamiliar house we'd been hiding near. As we squeezed our bodies against the dirt, the grimy wood pressed into our backs, barely giving us enough room to breathe. From our hiding place, we could see the disturbed man turn into the yard in front of us and begin searching around, hitting the bushes and muttering angrily. I realized then that Danny wasn't with us, but I hadn't seen where he'd gone. Tim had lost his glasses back at the bushes, and he just huddled in the shadows next to me in near blind terror. We stayed there in silence, waiting. Every so often, whenever I almost thought it was safe to come out, Footsteps would creep across the wooden porch above us. Tim almost sneezed, once, but I covered his mouth and nose in stark fear. We waited there so long that the tone of the sunlight began to change. We hadn't heard the man searching about in a while, and I was just getting ready to peek out, when footsteps clattered and a thud hit the wood directly above us. A split second later, Danny's face appeared in front of us upside down, and he looked at us through the lattice. A look of shock and surprise crossed his features at finally finding us. He whispered something, but I couldn't hear anything. He seemed to be saying come closer, so I figured that horrible man was still around and we had to be quiet, and I inched forward. Danny's features grew fearful, and he kept indicating something above us. Strangely, I still couldn't hear him. His eyes seemed to dim then, and I inched forward a little bit more. I froze for a moment in horror, then backed up. Tim mouthed to me, "What did he say?" And I just shook my head, completely in shock. Danny hadn't conveyed come closer, he had mimed he's up there. The drifter was unknowingly sitting right above us, waiting, because he knew we had to be somewhere in that yard. There was nothing to do but wait in silence, trying not to scream. I was glad Tim had lost his glasses. I lay there as darkness descended, waiting in unwavering terror and trying not to feel the glassy stare of Danny's severed head as it rested in the grass a foot away. I'm Not Braindaddy. Made by writer Josh. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. I've never been what you'd call a gamer. Sure, I own a console. It's outdated by now. I like to play the odd game. But that's about it. I'm almost 40. Old enough now that when I was at the height of my gaming years, all that really entailed was getting together with friends to play Mario or Castlevania, or Excitebike, or Punch-Out! Maybe Sonic if a friend had a Genesis, which no one does anymore. Keeping up with the latest trends in gaming was never interesting to me. I have a lot of interests: reading, watching movies and television, listening to music. But gaming? It was never a hobby. More like a pastime. Like most pastimes, I don't really understand when someone makes a lifestyle out of it. Today the gaming scene isn't aimed at the casual gamer. You get accused of being a noob if you aren't up to date on everything. It's almost a religion. So I leave it alone, and have been content to do so for several years now. For the most part, the gaming world has also left me in peace. There was one time, however, when the gaming world decided not to leave me in peace. In fact, the whole experience was enough to turn me off gaming for life. It happened at a pretty low time in my life. I had just had my ex-wife file for divorce from me, and I had moved back in with my parents while looking for a new place to live. I had recently gotten a new job after the one I had been at fired me for all the time I missed due to divorce proceedings. My new job was as a systems analyst for a major company. I was one of many, a cog in the machinery, but I had been in a few jobs like this in the past and they all operated differently. Some of them you only had to care about while you were there, while others expected you to bring your work home with you, and I had not yet figured out which kind of job this was. So when the call came, and I didn't immediately recognize the voice or the number, my first inclination was that it was probably someone at work. My mother answered it, and I heard from across the room a male voice ask if Brandon was there. Mom handed me the phone. "Hello," I answered. "Hello, is this Brandon Coates?" "Yes. Who is this?" I need to confirm some codes." At this point, I still thought this was a work call. I didn't recognize the voice at all, but I didn't know everyone at the office yet. Maybe this guy needed me to confirm my employee ID or something. Or perhaps he needed to make sure I had all the access I needed for the systems I was going to be helping maintain. "What sort of codes?" I asked. "Look, the fucking codes you provided aren't working," said the voice. At this point I began to realize this wasn't a work call. I was momentarily stunned, unsure how to respond to this jackass who was already getting hostile with me. His next words removed any doubt that he'd gotten the wrong Brandon Coates. For NBA Live. On Xbox 360. I'm only barely aware of the game system called Xbox. I've never played a game on it, nor did I ever plan to. Also, my job had nothing whatsoever to do with game systems. I'm sorry, I said. I'm pretty sure you have the wrong number. Don't fucking lie to me. The dude was really angry now. More angry than he should be over something as simple as dialing the wrong person in the phone book. You're Brandon Coates. You said so. Now fix these goddamn codes or fuck you, fucking Braindaddy punk. Okay, I said. I'm hanging up now. Don't call me again. He was still yelling as I hung up. I didn't give the matter a second thought. Likely the guy was just pissed and said some things in the heat of anger that he would regret when he calmed down later. But a couple of days later, I got another call. This time my father answered it, and after a moment, handed the phone to me with a concerned expression on his face. I took it and said hello again. The voice on the phone was not the same man who called before. Brandon Coates? Speaking. Listen, fuck you, Braindaddy. You're a fraud and a joke. If I see you again, you're fucking dead. I couldn't help it. I got pissed. Listen, fuck nugget, you've got the wrong guy. I told your buddy a few days ago that I'm not the Brandon Coates you're looking for, and this call is harassment. Yeah? You like it? Wanna suck my dick? I hung up. I almost couldn't muster the restraint to keep from hurling the phone across the room. Who are these people, Brandon? My father asked. The look on his face made me realize that he was concerned, not for his son who was being harassed for the crime of sharing a name with another guy, but concerned about his son who might be involved in something dangerous. I hadn't said anything to them about the last call other than wrong number, but a second call, from an obviously different person, cursing me out and threatening me? Dad was sitting close enough to me that I know he heard the other person's threat. His suspicions were raised. My parents and I get along okay, but to say they haven't always been on board with things I pursue is an understatement. For one, they were against my marrying my ex-wife to begin with, and several times in my life I'd had money problems. I could tell by the way my father asked who are these people that he fully expected me to answer, as if I knew. He likely thought they were money lenders or worse, wondered if I'd started selling drugs or something. The truth, in this case, would truly set me free, at least as far as he was concerned. They think I'm this other guy who has the same name, I said. They keep calling me Braindaddy. They think I'm involved with the Xbox 360 or something. I have no idea what they want, but they won't believe they have the wrong guy. Well, these calls need to stop, son, said Dad, the tone in his voice exactly the same as the one he used to use when I was in school. These bad grades need to stop, son. Just the same tone, like the calls were my fault. I honestly didn't know what to do. Contrary to whatever my father's suspicions are, I have never been involved in any criminal activity, and I didn't know how to deal with harassing phone calls. Also, a naive part of me thought the calls would stop on their own. That sounded like the easiest way to deal with it. And for about a week, it was. And then, one Saturday when I had nothing else to do and both parents were gone, the phone rang. I took one look at the caller ID and let it ring. The number and caller's name were blocked. It would most probably be someone calling for Mom or Dad. I had made it a point to not answer their phone if they weren't there. After all, I had a cell phone and most people who needed to contact me would use that. My parents are very old-fashioned people. They don't have voicemail. In this case, it was probably a good thing they didn't, or it would have been them that heard the message. They still had an answering machine, as if it was still 1988, and, like all answering machines, it didn't give a shit about privacy. Blasting through the house loud enough that two senior citizens could hear it no matter which room they were in, came the following message. Braindaddy, drawled a gravelly voice. The person on the other end sounded either like they had just woken up, or was drunk, or had a bad cold. I saw you at GameCon. Saw beautiful. It was like climbing through my penis, man. You're gonna take my dick up your ass, so saw. There was more, but it was just muffled curse words. I let it finish, and then I immediately erased the message. I decided it was time to get serious. Clearly they weren't going to stop. I could hardly believe what was going on. These people, all of them sounding like young men in their early 20s tops, had taken what I was starting to realize was an online vendetta way over the line. Their actions were bordering on illegal, and I knew I had to do something before they decided to. Who knows? Show up at my parents' doorway armed? I fired up my laptop and googled Brandon Coach Braindaddy. Search results were plentiful. The first 3 hits were nothing close to what I was looking for, but the third had the headline Braindaddy Brandon Coates gives his opinion on Call of Duty, Black Ops. There was more, but that was all I needed. Clearly this was the guy that the assholes calling me had thought they had reached. I opened the link and read a little way. It turns out there was a guy in my city, a really young guy by comparison, who did indeed have my name, and who was apparently quite the gaming guru. I'd never heard of him, because I wasn't a gamer, but if I were, there's no way I wouldn't have known who Braindaddy was. He had a following on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter and several gaming websites, wherein he would offer advice, reviews, offer cheat codes, etc. Apparently he was one of the most sought-after game reviewers in my area. He had made friends with some of the most influential names in the gaming scene. And from what I was starting to pick up on, he had also made several enemies. Finding his email was no challenge. As luck would have it, he did have it listed on his Facebook page. It was probably a business address, maybe one that he didn't even personally check, but I didn't care. Even if one of his subordinates read it, they would at least take the message I was about to send seriously. Mr. Coates. You don't know me, but we have the same name, and apparently this is enough for several severely misguided people to confuse us. Over the past few weeks I have received several harassing, threatening phone calls from people who believe I'm you. I neither know, nor care what you did to piss them off so badly, but I urge you to take action to get this all to stop. You appear to have resources to contact your followers, and if I were you, I would use those resources to inform them that they have been contacting a person with your name and behaving in an illegal manner. If these calls do not stop, my next step is legal action. I have a feeling you don't want that. I urge you to take this seriously. These calls stop, or you'll hear from my lawyer. I know what you're probably thinking. Why blame him for this? Why threaten him with legal action? After all, it wasn't him that had made the calls. No, it wasn't, but I know a thing or two about online flame wars, and I know that generally when it's reached a level like this both parties likely share blame. If legal action was being threatened, this other Brandon Coates would take me seriously. It turns out, I really should not have done that. The next call was not to my parents' house. It was to my cell phone. I wasn't able to answer when the call came through. I was at work. In fact, I didn't even see the call until my lunch break, when I checked my phone and saw a waiting voicemail. My call history showed one missed call. Naturally, it was a blocked number. I had no way of reaching the person who had left me this message. Of course, I knew who it was. My heart was hammering in my chest, more with anger than with fear, but I was a little afraid, too. Whoever these assholes were, they had gotten a hold of my unlisted cell phone number, which I had only recently acquired, after changing cities to move in with my parents, and which I had in no way, shape, or form put online, even in an email. I went to my car and retrieved the message. I sat there, feeling hotter than I should considering it was snowing outside, and listened. The voice that spoke was deep, raspy, haggard, and barely qualified as human. Hello, Mr. Brandon Coates, aka Braindaddy. Obviously you don't know what's good for you. You think you can fuck with us, but you're wrong. We know where you live. We've watched you sleep. We're watching you right now, as you sit in your car. You will never see us, but we always see you. You belong to us now, fuckball. Your worst nightmare has only just begun. Cold sweat broke out all over me. I was shaking. Never in my life have I felt such fear. My head began to whip around, looking at everyone who was passing by where my vehicle sat, just on the side of the road, less than a block from my office. That guy in a gray suit, was he looking at me? No, he was looking behind my car at a female jogger. What about the seemingly benign homeless man just a few feet away? Or what about that guy about to cross the street? My gaze went past the man waiting to cross. Behind him was a silent, still figure, staring straight at my car. No one else seemed to notice him, but I couldn't help it. He was short, almost dwarfish, and his proportions were strange. One arm was longer than the other, and his head and neck sat at a strange place on his body, almost to his shoulder. He was wearing a Halloween werewolf mask. In shock, I straightened in my seat and blinked my eyes a few times. When I looked again, he was gone. My phone rang just then. It sounded to my stressed ears like an air raid siren. "We've let you see us, Braindaddy. I hope you understand we mean business now." I swallowed. Clearly this person would not be threatened by legal action. "What do you want?" I croaked. "We want you," said the voice. "To die." There was silence on the other end for a while. I thought the person had hung up. And then, "But first we will kill your parents. First your mom, and then your dad, so he can watch her die. Then we're gonna kill your cheating whore of a wife. Then we're gonna kill your brother. When everyone you care about is gone, we're gonna kill you." "Why?" I heard myself ask, as if from far away. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you don't know who to fuck with and who not to fuck with, Braindaddy. You don't know the kind of deep well of shit you've disturbed. Apparently nobody told you the kinds of things we can do. Or maybe you don't believe we can do them. I hope you believe now, Braindaddy." I swallowed again. I was totally dry, so it felt like my throat was rubbing against sandpaper. I thought this was just about cheat codes or something. "It always starts small," said the voice. It kept getting deeper and more evil sounding. If Satan ever spoke to me, I imagined this is what his voice would sound like. "High-minded shits like you think you can scam and never get caught. We're here to show you just how wrong you are. You have no idea how badly you've fucked up." The line went dead. I spent the rest of that week in a cloud of fear and misery. I could hardly eat. I could barely breathe. I didn't dare call the police or try to warn my loved ones of what was happening to me. I knew they were watching. I knew that one false move from me would only hasten the punishment they felt I was due. I spent most of my time at home staring at my laptop screen, wondering what I could possibly do to end this hell I had found myself in through no fault of my own. And then, in the corner of my screen, a chat window opened. I hadn't used MSN chat for over a year. Most of the people I used to keep in contact with were no longer a part of my life. I had forgotten that the program was in my startup list and constantly running in the background. At the sight of it, I felt the panic rise. My vision blurred and for an instant, I was certain it was these people again, these faceless people who were always watching. But the screen name was Braindaddy. Here's a copy and paste of our chat. It was still logged in under my now ancient screen name DrinkPBR. "Braindaddy, I'm so sorry, dude. DrinkPBR, what the fuck, man? Braindaddy, I can't stop what's happening. Braindaddy, real sorry. DrinkPBR, what's happening? I can't breathe, I'm afraid to go outside. Braindaddy, it's complicated, man. I can't really explain. I never meant it to hurt people. DrinkPBR, dude, I warned you that if you didn't make this stop I'd get the police involved. DrinkPBR, who are these people? Braindaddy, nothing the police can do. DrinkPBR, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Braindaddy, listen, I don't have much time to explain. They were after M, but I pankissed and told them I want me. I saw your name come up on Facebook and I said it was me. Drink PBR, okay. First, your ass is so sued. Second, your smug fucking face is plastered all over these gaming sites. How did you manage to tell them I'm you? Braindaddy, they don't see like we do. Not really. Can't explain much better. They're not like us. They love to play games but they hated it when you offend them. Told them once to go fuck themselves. Now they want me dead. Drink PBR, no, they want me dead, asshole. And they're watching me right now, so don't tell me they don't see. Braindaddy, they hear you and they smell you but they don't see. Like I said, it's complicated. That's why I'm messaging you. If you don't talk, they don't know. Drink PBR, just tell me who they are. I don't want to spend the rest of my life afraid. Braindaddy, that's not how this works. You don't get to escape. They say they're coming for you, then you're dead. Drink PBR, you escaped them by telling them I was you. Braindaddy, got lucky. There was another Brandon Coates in my city. But we're the only two. Except he was quite wrong about that. He was the only Brandon Coates in the city. I was, in fact, born Warren Brandon Coates Jr. I went by Brandon, because my father went by Warren. I quickly logged off the chat room and went to work. I went to my Facebook page and changed my name to Warren Coates Jr. I did the same to my Twitter name, my LinkedIn resume, my email address. I changed the voicemail message on my phone to "You've reached Warren," etc. I pulled out my driver's license and smiled, seeing that my name read Coates, Warren Brandon Jr. And I waited. It wasn't until the next day that I heard from them again. I let the phone ring. Eventually it went to voicemail. I waited for over an hour before I had the courage to retrieve the message. It was the same voice, but the tone of his message was light and friendly. "Oh, sorry. I must have the wrong person." I never heard from them again. After a few years, I was able to relax, finally, convinced that I was safe. Yesterday I googled Brandon Coates Braindaddy again. The first hit was his obituary. That suited me just fine. Fuck him, anyway.
A Golden Memory. Made by Pasta Unit 01. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. My childhood was always filled with fun. When I was a young boy, boredom was a very rare occurrence. This was the case mainly because of how much time I spent being happily occupied with either my Nintendo 64 or my Game Boy. I was the master, the undisputed champion of every game I owned for those systems. Occasionally there would come a time where perhaps the 8-bit graphics and sounds of Kirby's Dream Land or Super Mario Land would leave unwanted lasting impressions on me while I was trying to have pleasant dreams during the night. Sure, those games could contain some spooky qualities, but that was never a difficult obstacle to overcome. I thoroughly enjoyed myself with my collection of the games, and life was relatively carefree and tranquil. Eventually, I lost track of where I kept those consoles somewhere in my family's new house when we moved out to a new part of the neighborhood. At first, it didn't have much of an effect on me and I learned to occupy myself with other things. But I encountered immense feelings of nostalgia years later. The very thought of not having those incredible systems any longer filled me with depression and an insatiable desire to revive my younger years. I was 15 years of age. It was a nice summer weekend, and the sun was beckoning me out my front door to bask in the beautifully shining weather. So I decided to take a leisurely bike ride through my old neighborhood, which was thankfully not that far away from where I live currently. Of course I had to stop by my old house to see how everything was faring in my original cul-de-sac. It stood right where it had always been at the end of the circle, but for some reason, everything had an empty sense. A tumbleweed drifting across the asphalt would have complemented the set perfectly. The whole area emitted a ghastly, vacant aura. I noticed something else. My former house's garage was open, and even though no one was there, it appeared to be advertising a yard sale. I parked my bike and nonchalantly strode up the driveway to view the collection being displayed. There were no price tags, no percentage labels, not even a box to hold profits. There was only a sign that read, "Everything no charge." That was also the thrilling moment in which I had located a small chest full of Game Boy cartridges sitting on the main table. Sure enough, right next to the chest, was the device itself. I practically jumped for joy. I only had to wait for the vendors to return so I could ask for it. Then I could relive a small portion of my childhood. But there was still no one there, even after I rode my bike around different streets and returned to the unusually eerie cul-de-sac after time had passed. Unable to wait any longer and completely disregarding the ominous setting around me, I decided to take one of the cartridges and the Game Boy console itself. I barely felt any guilt because of the overwhelming feeling of excitement rushing over me as I pedaled as fast as I could back to my own house. As I left, there was another feeling that left a shiver running down my spine. It was as if a pair of eyes was watching silently from the window of my old house. A witness to my theft. That still wasn't enough to faze me. When I got home, I immediately rushed to my room to examine what I had brought back. The Game Boy looked just like any other. It had the texture, the button arrangement, the classic green colorless screen, the cartridge slot. It was perfectly normal. The cartridge, however, was slightly different. It was shaded a darker gray color than the others I had looked at inside the chest. It displayed the usual Game Boy engraving on the front, but the label was torn almost completely off. The only words I could make out legibly near the top of the cartridge were Super Mario Land. This is fantastic. I can't believe I picked up one of my absolute favorite games out of all the others in the chest. Can this day get any better? Little did I know how the next handful of events would unfold. And little did I know what series of heart-wrenching, horrifying moments I would experience to leave me scarred and shaken to this day. I loaded the cartridge into the Game Boy and turned the power on. At first, I thought I would have to reinsert the game because of what appeared on the screen. It displayed the word Game Boy with the familiar 8-bit chime, but there was a black bar underneath the letters, which normally meant taking the cartridge out and blowing on it so that it would function normally. The word Nintendo would replace the black bar in order to let the player know the game was functional. However, it continued to the title screen. I shrugged it off and smiled at the classic title artwork of Super Mario Land with the high score right underneath the text. I stopped myself right when my thumb was about to push the start button to notice the staggering high score statistic last left by the previous player. It was 999,999, the maximum achievable score in the game. I sat on my bed, blinking with a dumbfounded expression at the huge number for more than a few seconds and pondering. How is that possible? Was the previous owner better than me as a kid? Nobody ever went farther than I could. I shook my head and dismissed it. The demo began playing, so I pressed the start button once to take me back to the title screen and another time to start a new game. In the meantime, I was contemplating on whether or not this was safe, and reminded myself of how I was a thief. But then I also remembered how nobody ever appeared to assist me, and the sign clearly indicated that everything was free. Besides, this game practically called on me. I have to answer it, and I won't turn back now. I engaged my concentration and focus as I controlled the Mario sprite when I entered the beginning stage, expertly weaving in and out of every Goomba, Piranha Plant and Koopa that dared to stand in my path. Before I knew it, the first stage had already been cleared. Yes. Still got it. That other player better watch out, I'm about to top his act. Once the second part of the first level was finished flawlessly, I entered the boss stage. To speed the process up towards arriving at the enemy's lair, I punched through a block at the very top and walked above all other obstacles harmlessly on a long stretch of blocks. I still had an abundance of time and a relatively high score for someone who hadn't picked the game up in years. However, I noticed a few strange things. The soundtrack would either skip a beat or repeat the note in the melody in periodic 30-second intervals, or fail to loop and follow with a short moment of silence before starting again. Then, I encountered what seemed to be a glitch right near the enemy when there were no more obstacles below me on the brick path, which oddly began to stretch onward as I kept scrolling, and an endless string of coins appeared where Mario was walking. It continued as if it would last forever. More than 60 seconds had passed before things finally returned to normal and no more coins were there. Weird. I don't remember this. Oh, well. It's probably because it's been a while. Everything else is normal. I observed the number of coins I collected. There were a total of 200 accumulated, enough for 2 extra lives. I had felt satisfied at hearing the repeating jingle of collecting coins, and it had saddened me slightly when there were none left to collect on the long brick stretch. But this still didn't feel right. Something seemed suspicious. These bugs were increasingly beginning to pop up more often. But I took a deep breath and exhaled, once again shrugging off an odd occurrence. The boss was one more scroll over, so I moved to the right and confronted him. Sure enough, there he was. Same as I remembered. I dodged fireballs shooting from the Sphinx's mouth, jumped onto the platform, and reached the other side of the bridge to bring the boss down to the ground. Down to the ground. Wait, down to the ground? That was what it had appeared to be. There was a pained expression on the Sphinx's face as he remained on the ground for a few seconds before he flashed a few times and faded out. There was no sound. Was this supposed to happen? Normally he was supposed to disappear in an explosion-like animation. As Mario entered the next room, the text appeared across the screen as he stood in front of the counterfeit prince's speech. But it was not the familiar expression of gratitude. The text read, "Thank you, Jack." The capital letters slowly erased themselves as the peach figure transformed into the insect, but instead of hopping out of the screen, the sprite seemed to shuffle along the ground at a sluggish pace until it finally inched out of the background. My stomach had lurched and my blood became chilled. It displayed my name in the text instead of Mario. There was also no Daisy at the end of the message, like there was supposed to be. Blinking shockingly at my Game Boy, I contemplated the game's programming and wondered if there was legitimately something wrong with it. Then again, perhaps it was simply a cartridge with a tendency to glitch often. I reluctantly decided to keep progressing. During the next few stages, I proceeded cautiously. Regardless, the background textures became distorted at times, and my name would appear for a split second in the area where my score was supposed to show. The soundtrack continued to glitch in the same manner as the first boss stage, but the Mario sprite remained normal as well as the enemies. Those were the only faults I encountered until after the second boss stage. I had gotten fairly used to those, but it was beginning to make me nervous. Once the next boss was defeated, a different message appeared on screen. Jack. You have found me. Once again, my stomach somersaulted. This wasn't normal. I was feeling tired from the long bike ride, so I hastily decided to give the game a rest and get some shut-eye, hoping it would be normal the next time I gave it a try. In my dream, the only thing I saw was the Mario sprite, standing motionless, giving me a fixed glare seemingly filled with fear and desperation, and repeating the same phrase. Jack. You have found me. Jack. You have found me. You found me. Found me. I awoke near midnight. My room was normal, but my eyes could still make out the silhouette of the haunting Mario sprite. My desire to relive my childhood was replaced with a desire to get the game over with as quickly as possible, be it a nightmare or not. I pulled the Game Boy out and turned it on with the Super Mario Land cartridge inside of it. The startup screen displayed the same black bar underneath the Nintendo text, but it seemed to hesitate before slowly fading into the Super Mario Land title art. There was only the text Super Mario Land. Everything around its border was shaded completely black. The sight filled me with dread and caused a bead of sweat to trickle down my face. But I hesitantly started another game. The normal game commenced, but there was no music. There were no obstacles, pipes, enemies, clouds, blocks, nor gaps in the ground to jump over. It displayed my name in all capital letters right next to my score, which was showing digits randomly every second. My coin count was 999, and there was no time left on the clock, yet the Mario sprite could still move. Then, the sprite moved back into the title screen, right where everything froze. A horrid sound bit, one which resembled a car engine slowing down gradually, progressively grew louder. As the 8-bit buzzing ensued, everything on the screen melted and became shaded even darker until nothing was left but a black line at the bottom. What the hell is going on? What's with this thing? My heart pounded rapidly like a timpani, and my pupils shrank in terror as they saw a new shape morph onto the Game Boy. It seemed to form a message similar to the text on the Super Mario Land title screen, but instead it read something quite frightening. Remember me? It flashed in different shades of white and gray, and then the press start text appeared directly underneath it. As my trembling thumb hit the start button, an extremely loud and high-pitched warble echoed from the Game Boy speakers. I flinched and covered one ear. In the next second, the game did something shocking. The actual programming shifted over, and the game file select screen for Super Mario Land 2 was being displayed. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the screen again. Sure enough, there was the new Mario sprite, slowly sliding through the pipe at the top and onto the pipes at the bottom of the screen, which represented which file number to choose and how much progress was made. I tried pressing the D-pad, shaking violently and breaking out into more of a sweat, but the sprite would not move. Instead, it turned to look directly at me. A static noise was heard in the background, and it grew louder as the sprite kept staring me down intensely. My heart almost stopped. In the next screen, a sinister bass line was blasting through the speakers. The background was completely black. An image was very slowly fading into view. It was a detailed 8-bit picture of Mario's head, severed from his body and bleeding from the eyes as he gave me a motionless gaze. The speakers seemed to form audible words from the immense static. Get to the house. Oh. Daisy. Oh. Daisy. You must hurry. I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I don't know what ridiculous idea went through my mind to take a Game Boy along with a cartridge such as this one, which seemed as if it were trying to talk to me from the game itself, from such a spooky location. I cursed myself for not walking away from it all when I should have. The name which was used in the game, Jack, must have been the name of its previous owner. I shook my head violently and choked back a petrified sob, adamantly denying the fact that the game could have been a satanic lure out with a sole purpose to kill me. But it was still possible. Fraught with emotions and with 1,000 things flying through my brain at once, I still tenaciously clung to the idea that the previous owner of this hellish piece of plastic might have coincidentally had the same name as me. And I had found it. It re-emphasized periodically that I had found it. Damn right I had, whatever it was, and I was also one step away from destroying it. But even though I felt I was on the verge of succumbing to a heart attack, I knew I had to get this over with as soon as I could. I wiped my face with a trembling arm, took a deep breath, and looked at the screen. I once again pressed the start button. Immediately, I was transferred out of the demonic image. The static stopped and was replaced with a new soundtrack. It took me a few moments to recognize it. but it was the graveyard theme to Super Mario Land 2 played in reverse. Mario's sprite appeared in a dark cave, but it didn't look like the same sprite at first sight. He had acquired old age, his suit and overalls were white, and his expression looked quite exhausted. When I pressed left and right on the D-pad, Mario had sort of an odd, awkward stride that did not look similar in any way to how he ran in either of the Super Mario Land games. His appearance was downright sickening. The counters on the screen were also, as expected, very screwed up. I had no lives left, but the time began counting into negative seconds and continued doing so throughout the mysterious level. The coin counter was, to my horror, set at 666. There was no score counter, only my name spelled in all capital letters at the corner of the screen. I was forced to disregard these statistics. I went to the right and progressed very deeply into the cave with the haunting reversed music accompanying my every step. There were no enemies. But there were numerous dead ends and warp pipes, eventually causing me to realize it resembled a labyrinth. I also noticed that every time I entered a warp pipe to enter into another screen, the same image of Mario's severed 8-bit head would appear in the transition, making matters much harder for me to deal with. Please let this go faster. Please make this hell go away. I never wanted this. I wiped a tear of despair out of my eye and went further inside the cave level. At this time, I had made considerable progress. It was also at the same moment a dialog box appeared, typing a message in all capital letters. "Jack, you don't have much time." I looked at the clock, and it had just reached past -400. I hurried my pace, my heart beating at a furious rate as cold-blooded adrenaline coursed through my veins. In the meantime, something else began appearing in my path, giant body bags. Apparently, they were collected in the same manner as coins in the normal game were collected. It had the same chime and positive flashing once Mario touched it. As difficult as it was for me to keep moving, the more body bags I collected, the more time was added to the counter, making things slightly less stressful for me as I journeyed through the depths of the hellhole. Right before the clock reached -666, I had reached the goal. But Mario walked straight out through the exit without the game-clearing soundtrack playing. I had no time to register that as another terrifying glitch as I was thrown into the world map. The same counters as the ones in the cave were shown on the screen, and the same reversed theme was playing. As I walked through each part of the map, the oceans were the same black shade. I passed by the locations of every zone as they were originally supposed to be there from the regular game, but they were non-existent. The only two parts shown on the world map were the shattered remains of Wario's castle and the haunted house zone. Seeing as the haunted house zone was my only choice, I muttered a few prayers and entered the zone. The Mario sprite went straight towards the boss panel inside the haunted house regardless of my D-pad commands. Once he was there, the familiar level selection jingle played and the screen faded out to white until the image of a house appeared with Mario looking at it from afar. The back of his head was turned towards the screen. The music came to a stop. Silence ensued. I was so appalled at the screen, it felt like my heart was being strangled as it almost leaped out of my chest, and I couldn't breathe. I was stricken. A dialog box appeared right below the house. "You have returned, Jack." The house was a picture of my old home. And I also realized the cartridge's previous owner was me. The sky turned into a pitch-black blob as the dialog box disappeared. A sinister laughing sound bit blasted through the Game Boy speakers as my old house burst into hellish flames, becoming completely engulfed as the surrounding area ignited violently into flames as well. Mario very slowly turned his head around until his body disappeared and the same severed head image appeared on the screen again. A wicked, sharp-toothed grin spread from between both his cheeks as warbled static was belched out full volume, belting my eardrums with satanic music. I turned the volume down and turned the power button off with a petrified, weakened scream, but Mario's face still smiled demonically through the screen directly at me. Unable to look at it any longer, I hunched over into my mattress as my body heaved with wailing, filled with remorse, anger, depression, fear, sadness, almost every negative emotion possible. Tears streamed down my face as I saw in my mind the never-ending image of my old house bursting into a gigantic firestorm. My heart still felt as if it was being strangled, my head aching miserably and being tormented with the static laughter of the damned console. After a few more moments of violent mourning passed, I heard my mother and father yell my name from downstairs. "Jack. Come down here, there's something important we need you to see." I already knew what I had to do. I threw on a change of clothes as fast as physically possible, took the Game Boy with the cartridge still lodged inside to place in my pocket, and raced down the steps into the house living room. My parents were solemnly staring at the television screen as it was showing a breaking news image of a house fire close to our neighborhood. The fire was spreading rapidly, and the area looked dreadfully familiar. I didn't need to watch anymore. I rushed full speed out of my house to get my bicycle and book it with all the strength I had left to my old cul-de-sac. My muscles screamed with tiredness, but my heart was still pounding with adrenaline as fear-fueled energy rushed through me. I finally arrived at my old house. It was just the same as it was before. Nothing had changed. It wasn't on fire, and none of its surrounding yard or neighboring houses showed any sign of combustion. I still shook with grief as I dismounted my bike and walked up to the yard sale table. Nothing was left. Everything had disappeared except for the main table and a note on it. I picked the note up and read aloud, attempting to keep my voice from cracking. "Never leave me behind again." The author was clearly anonymous, but I didn't care anymore. I slammed the Game Boy with the Super Mario Land cartridge onto the table and biked away from the cul-de-sac quickly, still sobbing quietly as I pedaled tiredly into the distance. But from the house, I could still hear the satanic laughter coming from the Game Boy, as if it had turned its volume back up and was now blaring the sound at maximum loudness. I made it back home. It was still around 2 a.m. I parked the bike and observed the windows. Strangely enough, the lights were turned off. My parents were asleep in bed. Disregarding that, I subconsciously snuck through the front door and went back into my own room. I had fortunately calmed down enough to stop sobbing, but my body was absolutely drained. I had no energy left to move after riding through the neighborhood at top speed for such a long time. Haunted with Mario's last impressions, I reluctantly climbed back into bed and fell asleep. I awoke the next morning and didn't remember what I had dreamed about. I didn't want to ponder upon the subject for that matter. Everything had returned to normal quite mysteriously. The morning routine went by smoothly, and my parents decided to take me to look at a yard sale advertised close to our neighborhood. Of course, it was the one at our old house. Only this time, it was teeming with customers and had a bountiful collection of antiques and vintage items on sale. The faces I noticed were very positive. But I could clearly remember the scars I endured the previous night. It was all I could see. I never forgot. And I never will.
Aokigahara Diary. Made by JJ's Pasta. Found in www.creepypasta.org web link. Day 1. I want to start off by saying, I didn't plan on coming here. My gambling tendencies got the best of me. Before I get ahead of myself, let me elaborate. On New Year's Eve me and a buddy got really drunk and he started telling me about Aokigahara, or more well known as, the suicide forest in Japan. He went on to tell me the horror stories of all the deaths and hangings, and I just figured he was full of shit. When I told him so, he didn't seem too pleased and bet me $600 that I couldn't last a month in the forest. Against my better judgment, I agreed and took the next flight to Japan. I was also told that I have to keep a journal with me at all times. He made it very clear that he wants an entry for every day, his exact words being, "Write your heart out. But don't lose your head." I hate to tell him that if nothing interesting happens, he's not getting an entry. Besides, the deal was that I last a month. Anyway, along with this journal I packed a month's worth of bottled water and canned food for my trip, as well as all the other camping essentials. It's going to be a heavy load, especially considering this forest is almost 14 miles long, but I suppose I put myself in this position. I will update as I venture on it once more before I head to bed. There are signs everywhere throughout the forest, some in Japanese as one would expect and others are in English. Each says something different, I'm sure, but I'm running across those that say, "Think about your family." It left an eerie feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I just kept walking past it and tried to ignore it. There are a surprising amount of people here. For this to be such a depressing place, it's quite the tourist attraction. I've only hiked in about a mile, so I'm going to head in about 2 more before the sunlight fades. I'd like to have a tent set up by then. Last entry before bed. I managed to get my tent set up just as the sun left the horizon. Once I was settled and ate a can of beans, a man came up to my tent. I had no idea who he was, but he seemed very worried about me. He knew a tad bit of English and tried his best to explain more about the forest, but eventually gave up. All he could really say that wasn't total nonsense and jibber-jabber was, "Forest is bad. You come in but never out." Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Day 2. I slept pretty well last night. This forest is strangely quiet once the stars are out. There were no birds flying around, no crickets were chirping, just pure silence. The only sound was that faint ringing that you can hear when there is no noise. Apparently it's your brain making up for the silence or some shit like that. After sitting outside my tent for a while, I began to see why people find this place so creepy. It has a strange vibe to it. It's hard to explain and I don't have time to explain. I will update if anything interesting happens. After I finished my breakfast, I packed everything up and headed out for another hike. Only about half a mile from my original campsite, I met a local who happened to speak English and we exchanged names and began talking. We started with small talk and I eventually asked him how spoke English so well. He told me that he studied abroad in America for 6 years before returning to Japan to catch up with his family. Our conversation got more in depth and he told me that he had grown up just about 3 miles from Aokigahara and had quite a bit of history to share. He told me since about 1988 an average of 100 suicides occurred each year. With that, he said that he had to head back home. Before he ran off, I asked why he was in the forest in the first place and his answer chilled me to the bone. His voice went monotone and he said, "To pay my respects, of course." When I said I came back to visit my family, I meant they were here in this forest. I stared blankly for a second, trying to think of what to say. Before I could muster any speech, he was halfway up the path headed to the entrance. I felt bad for the guy. I mean, this forest took his family away. Wait, what am I saying? All the horror stories I've heard of this place are starting to get to me. Day 5. Okay, so I slacked off for a few days, but what does it really matter? It's not like my buddy's going to read this shit anyway. I doubt anyone will. It has been a couple of days since I met that local I wrote about it in Day 2 and I'm really wishing he would come back. It sucks being out here alone with no one to talk to. The only people who are here either don't speak my language or don't speak at all. I think you know what I mean by that, call me morbid, but aside from this place being mind-numbingly boring, it's pretty relaxing. It's really hard to write and hold back vomit at the same time, but I'll try my best because no one will ever believe this if I don't write it down. The guy I spoke to the other day, the one who said he was paying his respects, popped up in the forest again. That's not the unbelievable part though. Let me explain. I had all my things on my back and was heading a bit deeper into the forest and had turned to look at a nearby creek when I felt something brush against my cheek. I quickly turned on my heels and swatted at it, thinking maybe it was some spider I'd never seen, but when I saw what I was swatting at I wished it had been a spider. Suspended in midair, still on his feet, were tennis shoes, his tennis shoes. I vomited and cried. I don't know why I cried. I only talked to the guy for 20 minutes at the most. I didn't have any emotional connection, if any. Still, though, my body's reaction was to sob as if I'd lost my mother. I've done what I can with getting the burn of vomit from the back of throat, but it seems to be a lost cause. I've decided to move on and try to make it to Mount Fuji. I've heard it's worth the hike. Then again, once I get there I don't know what I will do for the rest of my stay. I may just stay there for the rest of my time here so I don't have to walk back and see this site again. I was given the fortune of meeting the guy who has to inspect the forest once or twice a week. Well, he doesn't have to. He just chooses to. He came up to my tent, maybe around 7 p.m., and peeked in. Lucky for him I wasn't getting dressed or anything. I was a bit startled, however. He was very old and his face seemed to wrinkle more as he spoke. Glad to see someone hasn't given in. His English was great and I was taken aback by it. He began to leave but I stopped him before he went off. "Sir?" I called out. "Sir, come back." I heard his footsteps approach my tent once more. "Yes, young man?" His voice was soft and had a slight whistle to it. "What did you mean by, given in?" I asked, unsure if I even wanted an answer. He frowned slightly and looked to the ground. "This forest here, boy, has seen just as much death as a battlefield. I search here day in and day out trying to tally up the bodies. I try to save some too." His words fell heavy like bricks and tugged on my heart. "Have you ever saved anyone before?" Again there was an uneasiness in my voice. My mind screamed out no, but my morbid curiosity pushed away the objection. He made his way into my tent now and met me with a stern gaze. When a man begins to tally up dead bodies of innocent people, some of which he passed on the street a week ago, he begins to think differently. When a body becomes nothing more than a statistic, it's hard to stay hopeful. I'd like to say that the people I speak to rethink their decision, but at the same time I can't lie to myself or call myself a hero. I've spoken to people until I was red in the face, certain that they had saw the meaning of life, only to find them hanging here in this damn forest the next day. So I suppose the best answer I can give you is this: I don't have that power. I can't change how people feel when they're in that state. Only they can. With those words spinning around in my head, he exited the tent and began venturing back to the entrance. I was obvious how much this forest had changed him, and I'm not sure if I can deal with that kind of change, that kind of hopelessness. I'm beginning to think this trip was a mistake. Day 10. Again, I apologize for skipping out on this so many days, but this trip, aside from what I've written, has been uneventful. I've decided to stay in my tent today. I don't really feel the need to hike any closer to the entrance or Mount Fuji. I'm in a comfortable spot that has great shade and is quite secluded from the rest of the forest. There's that silence again. I've learned to welcome it, considering it happens so often. Why does this forest seem so damn peaceful? My plan to stay in my tent all day, or even for the rest of my trip, has been ruined. I awoke around 9 this morning and went to go take a piss in the woods somewhere. Being that I wanted at least a small sense of privacy, I went back pretty far. I would say just until no one was in earshot. Once I was done, I walked to my tent and was greeted with a gruesome sight. A man had tried to hang himself over my tent. From what I could make out, he had tied the rope to a branch and then jumped from a stump about a foot away. The rope must not have been strong enough to hold his weight because it snapped and caused him to fall onto my tent. If that wasn't bad enough, in some freakish way, he was impaled by one of the steel rods that holds up the tent. I decided to pack up what I could get. I had my backpack with me just in case some looters came by, so I had all my cash and things. And this journal. Since I have it, I guess I still have to write in it. I've decided to stay at a local extended stay hotel for the remainder of my trip. I just hope it's over soon. USDLP motherfucker. Stay out of the fucking forest. I'm really beginning to freak out now. I didn't write that last night. Or at least I don't think I did. I don't have any recollection of anything now that I think about it. Hell, the last thing I remember is checking into the hotel. I'm going to go hang out around town. Maybe taking in the culture will help me clear my head. Wow, Japan is one weird place. I never thought I would like scorpion, but it really wasn't half bad. Kind of tasted like chicken. I was only able to stay out for around 2 or 3 hours before a rainstorm came through. It can be nearly impossible to get around here sometimes. It's 5 o'clock now, so I am just going to watch some television and take a shower. Hopefully, no more weird shit happens. Son of a bitch. My fucking room is trashed. I was in the shower when I heard a huge crash from the other room. I turned off the water and jumped out, wrapping myself in a towel. I rushed into the room where the loud bang came from, only to find it was empty. Like I said, though, my room was trashed. The blankets and sheets were strewn all over the room, and the television, which is what I'm assuming made a big bang, had fallen off the stand and laid screen down on the floor. Lucky for me, nothing was broken or stolen. I thought it was pretty weird that no one else on the hall I was trying to figure out what the hell was going on, so I put on some pants and went over to the hotel room beside mine. I knocked a couple times and finally someone opened the door. It was a petite Japanese girl who hid halfway behind the door as if scared or nervous. I asked her about hearing anything strange or seeing anyone in my room, but from what I could make out of her broken English she was clueless. I didn't bother with anyone else, assuming they wouldn't understand me either, and just went back into my room and sat on the bed. That's when I noticed. There was a small note sandwiched between the mattress and box spring, about an inch or 2. I reached down and opened it up. It felt wet and was stained with what looked to be muddy fingerprints all over. The writing was barely legible, but from what I could make out it said, forest.calls.you. It was very cryptic, and I tried to play it off as some stupid prank a local had played on me. My trip might have to end sooner than I expected. This is getting out of hand and freaky as hell. Day 12. forestdb@yadi. Again. I didn't write that. I'm so fucking tired of this. I'm done. I don't want to write in this stupid fucking journal anymore. I just want to know who is. I want to go home. I've decided to set up my camera to record me as I sleep. I'm going to figure out who the hell is doing this, and when I see who, I'll show the police and we can track them down and figure this shit out. I have also put the journal under my mattress, that way whoever tried to take it won't know where it is, and if they found out, I'll wake up before they can get it. I'm going to bed now. The camera is rolling and the journal is about to be in place. It's time to figure this shit out once and for all. Day 13. I woke up this morning and my bed was covered in mud. I was fully clothed and I even had my hiking boots on. They were also covered in mud. I shot up from the bed and looked over at the camera, knowing it had the answers. The sheets, that were once pearly white, are now stained with dark, brown mud. I hope like hell they don't charge me for that. I'm going to look at the footage on the camera and update afterwards. I wouldn't believe if I didn't see it. I had went to bed around 10 last night and the footage was pretty normal for the first couple of hours until midnight rolled around. From the right side of the frame a dark blob, for lack of a better word, crept into my room. It seemed to float and didn't really have any features. It just kinda floated and undulated as it did so. It stood maybe 6 feet tall with its, what you could call a head, touching the top of the frame. What it did next made my heart stop. It made its way over to my bed as I slept and began to morph into something smaller. The bottom part of it seemed to lift itself up and merge with the middle. The top followed with a similar motion. After it had shrunken itself to the size of a basketball, it shot at me only to disappear when it made contact. I thought that was it, but then I saw myself sit up in the bed. My eyes were still shut and my movements were clumsy. I pulled myself out of bed, put on my clothes and hiking boots, then left the room. I didn't return until 8 the next morning. I woke up an hour later. I never saw the thing leave my body. I have no recollection of this, and the only way I know it happened is by looking at this footage. The journal was untouched and I haven't found any more messages or strange notes. I'm going to take a shower to clean off and then speak to someone at the front desk about the sheets. I haven't decided if I should show him the footage or if I should just say I fell asleep like that. The answer seems obvious, but I don't want to be charged for the sheets and I don't want to look like a crazy person. I guess I'll decide while I'm in the shower. My shower was cut short by someone knocking at the door to my hotel room. I was really confused considering no one knew me here, but I decided to answer it anyway. It turned out to be that older guy who was in the forest a while back. I remember writing about my encounter with him. I asked what he needed and with worry in his voice he said, "You." Having no idea what he meant, I invited him in so we could talk things over and maybe reach an understanding. When he walked in and saw the sheets, he began to mumble to himself. Our conversation was quite long, so I will only touch on the important parts. According to what he told me, I had to leave this place as soon as I could. He told me I couldn't simply go to a different hotel, I would have to leave the country altogether and head back home. He went on to tell me about a close friend of his who woke up to muddy sheets one night. The next night he was found hanging in the forest. He left a note by his body and this man kept it all these years. The only words written on the note were, "The forest called me. I am home." Last night, the man said, when that thing came into you, it showed you where you were going to hang yourself. Your subconscious knows, and the only way to stop it from happening is to leave this place. As you might imagine, I was totally freaked at this point. After he left, I drove up the airport and bought a ticket to fly back home. The only problem is my flight leaves in 3 days, he said. I had one night. Day 14. I'm so cold. I can't see anything, so to anyone who finds this, I apologize if it is illegible. I don't know where I am. I think I'm in the forest. Somewhere deep into the forest. It has never been this dark before. The last thing I remember is speaking to the man and then laying down to go to sleep. Was it last night? How long was I asleep? The only thing I know at this point is that whatever wanted me in the forest has gotten me. It's so cold. I can barely move my fingers to write this, but I have to warn everyone. This place is not safe. If you are going to visit here, don't stay overnight. Don't even come. Just stay home. It's safe there. I think I'm going to try and make my way out of here. My eyes have adjusted to the darkness and I think I can make my way around if I walk slowly. I need to get out of here before it is too late. I should have stayed where I was in waiting for sunrise. Although I can make out my surroundings, it just makes it worse. One would think that regaining a sense of sight that you once lost would put one at ease. I'll admit that it did at first, but as I continued walking, all I could see were the bodies. They were hanging from the trees and some just laid on the ground with a noose still attached but broken. The trees themselves even seemed to morph into mutilated bodies of those less fortunate. The bodies lay eviscerated, leaving me with no hope and vomit in my throat. I'm beginning to think that fate may be better than the one I am suffering. Day 15? I'm not sure when I collapsed or how long I was out. The last thing I remember seeing were those bodies and then nothing. It all goes blank. The sun still hasn't risen, but I do believe another day has started. Something about it feels different. After I pulled myself to my feet, I made it over to a tree trying to steady myself as I was still woozy. I have been standing here for what feels like hours. My legs are shaky and sore, but I have to press on. I have to make it out. The sun finally rose. It was such a beautiful sight. As it rose in the distance, I just stared in awe. The warmth of its rays warmed my pale goosebump-ridden skin. I couldn't help but let a smile spread across my face. Pushing aside the thrashing pain in my legs, I pushed on. I pushed myself to the exit of that forest and finally made it out to the entrance, where I fell to the ground and one more time. This time, however, wasn't out of weakness but out of solace. I was free. I escaped. The man that had spoken to me within the first few days of my arrival met me at my hotel room that afternoon after I cleaned up. He spoke with a low tone but made it clear as to what I had accomplished. I'm on a plane back home now and I could care less about the money or the stupid forest. I Skyped with my buddy whom I made the bet with once I reached LAX. The look on his face when answered was priceless. I will write the conversation out instead of briefing it. Hey, man. I can't believe it. He seemed extremely excited to see me. I responded with a disappointed tone, yeah I know. I knew I wouldn't make it. His jaw dropped, what the hell are you talking about? You went the entire month. I never thought you would make it but you proved me wrong. Listen, come over by my place and I'll hold up my end of the deal. He disconnected after that. I couldn't believe it. Did I really make it that long? If so, then that means I must have been out in the forest for over a week. My head began to hurt as I tried to make sense of the situation. I figured that I should just be grateful I had made it out and left it at that. Even though it is over, I have an urge to continue writing in this journal. Maybe one day someone will read over it, or maybe if I want to go back to that vacation I can read over it. Until that day come, I think I'll put this journal to rest and just open up a new one. Also, no more adventures for me. Not for a long, long time. You guys wonder where I find these creepypasta stories? The link is in the description below. If you enjoy the video, please leave a like and subscribe. And as well share this video to your friends. Thank you.